We are rolling. Okay. So today is August 1st. We're in Chicago. What's the neighborhood here called?
It's called Glenview.
Glenview.
Yes.
We're just look at my hand for a sec. Hold on. Okay. All right. Let's keep it more at my eyesight. So we're in Glenview, Chicago.
Yes.
And we are at the home of
Uri Wilensky.
And we are talking today about your father.
Yes.
Can you give me his full name?
Mordechai Lev Wilensky.
Mordechai?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a second generation interview, which we call. We have first generation, and then we have second generation. You're actually we're going to be talking about your father who is deceased, but because his story is important for our archive, we're going to let you tell the story. So, I'm going to ask you when and where your father was born.
My father was born in 1914 in a town that was then Lithuania, but it's exchanged hands a number of times.
I need you to always keep eye contact.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a town called Kobrin, Kobrin, and that town changed hands a lot between Poland and Lithuania, but is currently in Belarus.
It's currently in Belarus, okay.
And I'm going to be going there in 2 weeks. To visit.
Wow. And have you ever been there?
Nope.
Wow, it would have been amazing if I could have interviewed you after you.
I know. I thought about that after. After you.
Okay. Now tell me. So he's born in August 1914?
No, I didn't say August. I said his birthday, June 16th.
Okay.
1914.
June 16th, 1914. So he's actually born about 2 months before the outbreak of the First
World War. That's right.
What kind of town was this that he came from?
Kobrin. Well, there's sort of a story about that. In that my father didn't talk a lot about it. You know, like a lot of Jews from those times, he just couldn't talk about it much. So I had to learn most of what I learned from other sources, but I had always envisioned Kobrin as a town sort of like Anateska, you know? And I was actually waiting in line for theater tickets in Chicago, and this woman in front of me, you know, said, "Uri, that's an Israeli name." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I'm Israeli." We talked for a while. Then she asked me where my father was from, and I said, "It's a little town, you never would have heard of it, so don't even bother." And then she said, "Well, just try me. I know a bunch of towns." And I said, "It's called Kobrin." And she said, "Sit down for a second." First of all, my mother's from Kobrin. So
that's what she said to you.
Yes. And second, Kobrin was not a little village. There were 100,000 people, over 25,000 Jews living in Kobrin. So it's a city. I'm going to be there shortly, and I will get to see it.
What do you know about this city? Like, what do you know about it as far as historically for Jewish culture?
Well, it had a bunch of yeshivas. It still has the Great Synagogue is still there and is a tourist destination in Kobrin. It was a place of a lot of learning. And people went back and forth between the various yeshivot, between Vilna and Mir and a few other places. So there was a lot of learning. A lot of rabbis lived in the town. My father's grandfather was a rabbi, and he had 6 children. Which
your grandfather?
The oldest was my grandfather. And my grandfather and my father was the oldest child, and he had 3 brothers. So the 3 brothers and his parents were killed in the Holocaust.
Wow, so he was a sole survivor, your father? My
father was a sole survivor, but his grandfather also survived. His grandfather went to Georgia, not
to the Caucasus.
Not to the Caucasus, to Augusta, Georgia.
That's where James Brown's from.
That's right. He went to Augusta, Georgia to make some money to send back home. And so he stayed there. And his younger 5 children came with him.
His younger 5 children came with him?
Yes. So they all survived, but my grandfather didn't. my grandfather stayed in Europe.
Your grandfather stayed in Europe. What kind of upbringing did your father have? Like, what kind of household did he come from?
Well, his father was a shopkeeper, and they had a shop in Cobrin. I don't know much about the shop, except that all the business was done by his wife.
Grandmother.
Yes.
She wore the pants in the family.
Apparently, my father always used to say she was brilliant. My father, I don't exactly know a lot about his education. I know he spent some of it in yeshiva, but I ran into a woman. This is a long story too, but I won't tell it right now. But I ran into a woman who's over 100 years old, living in Chicago, from Cobrin, and she remembered my father. She's still alive, actually, although not for much longer. She's in hospice care. But she said that she knew my father from a school called Tarbut. And that's surprising to me because there was a religious family, and Tarbut is a secular school.
So he did come from a religious family, your father?
Yeah, it was a religious family.
It was a religious family.
His grandfather, as I said, was a rabbi, and apparently people in Georgia say his grandfather was a real stickler for halacha and was, always making sure that they didn't miss anything at the synagogues in Augusta, Georgia.
Was your father the eldest?
He was the oldest, yes.
And he had 3 brothers?
3 brothers.
So there were 4 boys?
4 boys. Actually, there was a girl too, but she died...
In infancy?
I think it was early childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably for some tuberculosis or
something like that. I don't know that story either.
Okay. As far as you know, does your father belong to any youth movement in then Lithuania?
I'm sure he did.
Okay.
He was a fierce Zionist, which is what sent him out of Poland at the time to go to Israel or Palestine. He, I guess he's kind of known, and I wish I had this information a little bit better, but he wrote an editorial in the Yiddish papers that a lot of...
Do you know what the editorials were about, or what?
No, there was one. It was just one editorial.
He wrote one editorial, and what was it about?
It was about Jews, get out of here now, go to Palestine.
And do you know roughly around what year this was?
It should have been 1933. Could have been anywhere between 32 and 34, but I think it was 33. And I wish I had a copy of that, and I don't. And
of course, he wrote it in Yiddish.
He wrote it, I think he might have written it in Hebrew, but it was a Yiddish newspaper, so I don't know. Okay. My father was absolutely fluent in Hebrew, and as a lot of the Jews in Cobrin were. He's more than fluent. He was writes beautiful Hebrew, so beautiful that many people think he should have been a novelist. So that was kind of interesting. And he was absolutely fierce Zionist. So he must have belonged to movements.
But you don't know which ones.
Well, it wouldn't have been a Shomer Hatzair, I can tell you that.
Okay, so that's important to know.
Yeah.
So he's more leaning towards the revisionists?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so
he knew Begin. He knew a lot of the people in that time. Begin invited us over one time.
Did you meet Begin?
I did, yes. Yeah, I met him. But we met a lot of the people. My father and mother knew a lot of the people in the government, so we met a lot of them. I even have pictures of us with various presidents and so forth in Israel. So both my parents were Jewish scholars that wrote a lot of books about Jewish history, in my mother's case, Jewish philosophy. So they were pretty well known in the Yishuv.
Okay, so your father immigrates to Palestine
in 1934, I believe.
And he is 20 years old.
20 years old.
He's 20 years old. Did he have any education before he came, or was he?
Yeah, he went to high school in the Cobrin area, and had to take all the Polish exams. He used to talk about the exams, and he was always surprised that I was a mathematician because he said those math exams were terrible.
Okay, so he did he meet your mother in Palestine?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get to that. So in 1934, right. He immigrates to Palestine.
Right.
It is 2 years before the Arab Revolt.
That's right.
Basically.
Yes.
And where does he end up in?
Well, he knew he's a scholar. He knew he wanted to go to university.
And he probably wanted to go to the Hebrew University.
So he enrolled at the Hebrew University right away.
Okay.
But he didn't have any money, so he would get up at 4 a.m. and work on the railroads until about 8 or so, and then he'd go to classes. And he used to have lots of stories about working on the railroads with a lot of Arab workers and drinking their coffee and sort of hanging out. He has fond memories of doing that.
Really?
Before going to school.
And what did he study at the Hebrew University?
He studied history. Jewish history.
Jewish history.
Yeah.
Did he ever have any, did he ever talk about Avraham Stern?
Yes, he talked about Avraham Stern. I think his advisor was Kloisner, but he was conversant with a lot of people. He became, I think he was definitely not an Eitzel member, but he was definitely palsy-walsy with a lot of the revisionists, and he knew Netanyahu's father quite well. Ben Zion.
He was also an historian.
Right.
He knew him quite well from when he was in the States, later, or at that time. And I think his father was also the private secretary to Jabotinsky.
That's right. Yeah, he talked about that a few times. And the Netanyahus were over at our house sometimes when we lived in Boston.
When they were in the 60s.
I guess it was the 60s. Yeah. And I guess they were, I'm not sure where they were exactly. They were somewhere south of us. Philadelphia. Yeah.
Philadelphia.
I think that's right.
So you actually, did you meet them?
Yes, I did. Yes. I met both Yoni and
really?
Vivi, yes.
Wow. Okay. Anything that you remember specifically about them?
Just one thing. I mean, I was pretty young. I probably was about 10. So one time, for some reason, my parents couldn't find a babysitter, so the 2 boys babysat me. And I remember jumping off the staircase onto, I think it was Yoni's back. And he let me do it over and over and over again.
Really? Yeah.
Because we had this steep staircase going up to the 2nd floor. That's all I remember.
Let's go back to your father studying at Hebrew University.
Yes.
So he lives in Jerusalem.
He lives in Jerusalem, yes.
Maybe at the dorms on Mount Scopus?
I don't know. I would guess that would be the dorms in Mount Scopus.
And he's studying history.
Jewish history,
Jewish history. How and when do you know that he's starting to get involved with, is it in Palestine where he starts to develop his political views?
No, I think they started when he was still living in Poland. I think if we could get a hold of that editorial, it would definitely show leanings in that direction.
So he believed in Israel, both sides of the Jordan River, probably Jabotinsky.
I don't know for sure that he believed in that. I know for sure that he believed that they were going to make a state of Israel no matter what.
And the British got to go.
Yes. For sure, yeah, and he wrote about that as well.
He wrote about that because he's drinking coffee with Arabs and working with them. Apparently, he's getting along with them.
Yeah, he's getting along with them.
The British are the enemy.
Right.
The British,
the Arabs were not the enemy for him.
No,
yes.
I understand. So what does he do? So he's studying at the Hebrew University. What else is going on with him there at that time?
Well, I think he was very involved in politics in many different ways, but he was a serious scholar, and around he graduated after 4 years, and immediately enrolled in a PhD program at Hebrew University. And he was the 2nd person to get a PhD at Hebrew University.
Really?
I don't know who the first was.
I was just going to ask you that. Who's the first?
I don't know, but he was the second.
He got his PhD
in Jewish history.
In Jewish history.
But the Hebrew University didn't have quite enough, sort of strength in history at that time. So they sent him to Cambridge, and he spent 2 or 3 years in Cambridge.
Around what time, do you know?
That would have been, I think, the early 40s.
So during the war?
Yes.
Did he ever think about...
It could have been just before then.
Did he ever think about joining the British Army?
I don't know if he did. He's such a scholarly person that I don't think that was his nature to want to be a soldier. But again, he didn't talk about it a lot.
He didn't talk about it a lot.
No.
And he finishes his PhD.
Should we get her out of here?
Yeah, if we could.
Okay. Maya, I'm going to have to put you in the other room.
He gets his PhD in Cambridge.
No, he was there either 2 or 3 years, and then came back for his last year or two at the Hebrew University, and so his PhD is awarded from Hebrew University, even though he was in Cambridge.
Okay.
For 2 or 3 years.
For 2 or 3 years.
And I know he hung out in sort of intellectual circles. I know that he was friends with Anna Freud when he was there, and because he told stories about her. But I don't really know much about
those years.
Those years at all.
And when did...
So that he spent a lot of time in the library.
When did he meet your mother?
He came back, I think they met when he came back, and he was in his final year or two at the Hebrew University. She was an undergraduate. And they started dating.
Where was she from?
She's from Tzfat.
She was born in Tzfat.
She was born in Tzfat.
Tzfat is normally, Jews are affiliated with Samechtet. Samechtet.
What is Samechtet?
Samechtet are Jews, Sfaradim, Tehorim.
Well, they were not Sephardi.
They were not Sephardi. Okay. Just that you know, Samechtet are the Sephardic Jews that when the Inquisition happened, they came back to Palestine. They came back to the Holy Land. They didn't go to Morocco. They came back to the Holy Land immediately.
Right. Well, my mother's family.
Yitzhak Navon.
Yitzhak Navon. Yeah. My mother's family, though, lived in Tzfat for a few hundred years, and they came from Europe.
They came from Europe. And just for the record, your mother's full name, her maiden name?
Sarah Heller.
Heller.
Yeah.
Okay. So your parents meet at the Hebrew University.
Right.
When your father returns from his 2 years in Cambridge.
Yes.
When did they get married?
I think it was in late 45, or it could have been early 46.
In Tzfat?
No, they got married in Jerusalem. So my mother's family, my grandfather was the rabbi of Tzfat, and very, very Orthodox family. And he had 5 daughters and no sons, and it had been a line of rabbis, and so this was a big tragedy. But he was a very enlightened guy, and when my mother told him at the end of 8th grade she wanted to go to high school, and there was no high school for girls in the area, he agreed to let her move to Jerusalem on her own when she was 13 or 14 to go to high school.
Insane. And was the wedding accepted by her family?
Yes.
Yeah, it was okay.
I mean, mostly.
Mostly.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been better if he was a rabbi.
Sure.
But
and there's a big episode with your father in 1946.
Right.
Let's get into that big thing.
So it was shortly after they were married. They were living in Rehovot. My father was teaching at the gymnasia there, which I don't remember the name of it, but he was teaching there. He'd just gotten his PhD and he was making his way. And apparently he was both writing things and talking to people about the need for the British to get out, and it's time for it to be Eretz Yisrael. And I don't believe that he had anything to do with actual gun running or things like that. I don't think would have been his way. But for whatever reason, he talks a good game, and so he came to the attention of the British, and they accused him of collaboration with Eitzel and took him to prison in Latrun.
And how long was he in prison for?
Well, he was in prison for about 3 months when my mother, came to the British authorities and said, please let him out. We just married. We just started our life together. And my mother was a very charming person. Apparently she was convincing. They said, yes, but on one condition. You leave the country immediately. And, you know, for both my parents that was hard, but for my mother, whose family had all taken sworn oaths that they'd never leave Eretz Yisrael, and hadn't. In fact, I'm the only member of my family to not still be living in my mother's family to not still be living in Israel. So they were very, very Zionist family. So it was terribly hard on my mother to leave, but she took the conditions.
Did your father ever tell you about what happened in Latrun, or like, did he ever tell you?
He didn't talk a lot about it. He said it was pretty bad, but there was, you know, it was not like American prisons where there was sexual violence or stuff like that. But he didn't talk a lot about it. And he said he had books, so he was okay. He could read, and he wrote, and he helped some prisoners with writing things and writing letters. That's about all I know. And there were other prisoners there who had similar views to him, so I mean, it was not a totally lonely place for him either. But my mother couldn't stand for him to be in prison. So.
And what was he charged for? I mean, did he go in front of a judge, or was he like just detained?
I don't know.
You don't know, okay.
I don't know. I wish I knew more. You know, in thinking about this interview, I realized there were so many questions I should have asked. But my father was really not very happy to talk about this. You had to pull at him.
And so in 1946, they leave? Is that correct?
Yes. Do you want me to turn that sound, this beeping going on? Just stop.
Sure. Oh, it stopped.
Okay.
They leave in 1946?
They leave in 1946, and my father has a job at a place called Hebrew Teachers College in Boston. So they move.
How did he get that job? Do you know? Or just
he applied for it. I mean, my father was already, you know, reasonably well-known scholar, so I don't think it was super hard for him to get it. But it was a good position because it was Hebrew Teachers College was an unusual place in that, you know, sort of the most scholarly Jews in the Boston area would go there, so they, you know, spend their daytime at Harvard or MIT or other schools, and then they'd go to Hebrew college in the evening. You know, it's sort of like Hebrew school in the U.S., except that it was at the college level.
Do you know about any activities that your father was a part about in the States during 47, 48 about the establishment, during the establishment of the War of Independence or the State of Israel, if he was...
I know he wrote articles. That's all I really know.
What did he write articles for?
Well, he was the editor of a column of the Jewish Advocate called Hatur HaIvri. So it was written in Hebrew. And
so his weapon was the pen?
I believe so. I mean, it's not beyond my, you know, imagination that he might have done more than that, but I don't know about it.
You just don't know about it. And he ends up spending how much time in Boston?
Well, my mother enrolled in graduate school at Harvard, and so they stayed there until she got her degree. She got her PhD in Jewish philosophy. And I think that was done in like the early 50s. And then they hung on for a little longer until my mother couldn't take it. You know, she didn't dislike Boston or the U.S.
She just missed her home.
She missed Israel too much.
What did she do?
Well, there was a little bit of a fight between the parents.
Did he want to go back? Your father didn't want to go back?
He did want to go back, but he had a great job, and he didn't have one in Israel. So, you know, he wanted to continue his scholarly activity.
Also, let's also mention at that time in Israel, things are a mess. There's Tkufat Tzena, the Tzena.
Right.
The whole ration period.
I don't think that would have intimidated my dad at all.
Okay.
He was a very, very strong man in almost every way, and was, you know, capable of, you know, a lot of privation without any complaints. So I don't think that would have stopped him. I think it was really the need for keeping his intellectual life alive.
So after your mother, so what happens?
In 56, they have a fight about this. And she says, I'm going. I'm taking Uri and I'm gone. She moved to Israel.
With
on her own. With me, yeah. And I think we moved back to Rehavia. And finally, after a year, my father knuckled under and moved there too. So we lived there for another year or two, but my father did not get an appointment at Hebrew University. He expected to get it and didn't get it. I'm not sure exactly why, but it was probably very competitive. And so they again moved back to Boston. Again, my mother not being happy about it. But she was appointed at the Hebrew College too, and then later at Brandeis. So, she had a job too. And they stayed there till 1969, which is quite a long time. And then finally, again, my mother said, I can't do it anymore. I've got to move to Israel. And she moved to Israel in 1969, and, with me. And then, again, after a year, my father knuckled under and moved there permanently in 1970. And he did have a job at the Hebrew University then. So he finally got, a job that, I think he much preferred being in Israel to being in the U.S.
Sure.
But
so he lived in Night from 1970?
Yes.
Until he passed away?
Well, mostly, yeah. When I went to college in the U.S., he came to live here for a year or two, and he had a job at Harvard teaching, and then he was in the Ukrainian Institute at Harvard and taught Jewish history and also Eastern European history. And then he started to get somewhat ill, and he didn't really feel like he could do much anymore, so he moved back to Jerusalem. But at that point, his job at Hebrew University was gone, so he taught at a school in Yerucham.
Okay.
My father loved, my father was loved teaching in many ways. So, and he liked teaching students who were
unprivileged.
Unprivileged. So one of the things that I loved in my childhood is he used to conduct the seders in the prisons, and he used to take me in Boston.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I guess maybe he still had some, appreciation for prisons from his own time in prison, but he also just liked that kind of thing. So I think he thought it was an interesting challenge to go to Yerucham.
And they lived in Rehavia also at that time, or they were
no. At that point, my parents, they stayed together in Rehavia till 73 or 4, and then my mother got appointed to be the chair of the Department of Philosophy at Haifa University. So she went to Haifa, and it was even earlier than that. It was probably 71, and then and so we all moved up to Haifa together, and my mother remains in Haifa. She's still alive. She's 99. She's still alive. She's settled in Haifa. But my father was still so tied to both Yerucham and the Hebrew University, so he stayed in Jerusalem. Okay. It wasn't a divorce. They still saw each other.
Hey. Two hardcore academics, man.
Like what they call a two-body problem here.
Exactly. Wow.
So he moved to what is that called? I should know this. It's near Har Herzl, Bayit Vagan. Yeah. He moved to Bayit Vagan first to an apartment and then into a sort of elder care facility, and lived there while my mother stayed in Haifa. Yeah. And she's still there, as I said. And he lived there until he got so sick that they didn't want him there anymore. And he needed to go to CUD.
Yeah, CUD, yeah.
And so I came down and I got him and brought him back to Boston.
You did?
Yeah, and he lived with us, my wife and I, until we couldn't take care of him anymore, and then he moved into a facility, a very good one in the Boston area, and that's where he passed.
When did he pass away?
1999.
1999.
Yeah. He died about 6 weeks before my younger son was born.
And is your son named after him?
No, he's not.
Okay.
But one thing that's surprising to me is he never mentioned that to me. He always called his father Abba to me, I mean, when he talked about him. So I only recently found out his father's name was Uri. So I guess...
Your grandfather's name was Uri?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. But he died in the Holocaust,
Yeah.
10 years before I was born, or 11 years before I was born. Yeah, so I never knew that until much later in life. But yeah, his name was Uri Shraga Feivel, my grandfather.
And your last name?
Wilensky.
Wilensky.
Yeah.
So this is your father's grandfather, whose name was Uri.
No, my father's father.
Your father's... Yeah, your grandfather.
My grandfather.
Yeah.
His father.
Yeah, Wilensky is the last name?
Yes.
Wilensky, Uri Wilensky. And your father's full name again?
Mordechai Lev Wilensky.
Mordechai Lev Wilensky. Well, if there's anything that you think, I mean, it's been a short interview, but if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about your father that we didn't talk about, this is definitely the time.
I'm thinking.
Please, take your time.
My father, wrote thousands, well, anyway, hundreds of articles, I should say, and several books. And he looked deeply into what, the sort of divisions within Judaism. And his most famous book was called Hasidim Uminagdim Toldot Pulmus Beinehim, in which he sort of goes to Russia and uncovers sort of all the stuff that's going on in Russian Jewry. And he took me with him in 1967, fateful year, and so we were in Russia together. And while he was there, he definitely did political activity. So
with Soviet Jewry.
With Soviet Jewry, yes. So he smuggled samizdat out. He met with refuseniks. And even though he was there primarily on a scholarly mission, he did do that stuff.
Very important.
Yes.
And of course, he spoke Russian. So.
Yeah, he spoke like 8 or 9 languages. Yeah, and he was pretty fluent in all of them, but had a big accent in English. He was a very, very dedicated teacher. He would win awards regularly for his teaching throughout his whole life. And he really taught students to be Zionists but not through persuasion, but through looking at texts. Yeah. Through looking at
education.
Right, through education.
Yeah. Not by inciting or
and they engaged in all the debates of the of the Yishuv, and also beforehand, the arguments between Jews in Europe about what the nature of Eretz Yisrael would be. Does it have to be in the land, or not be in the land? Are Jews actually better off, but Tfusot, yeah. And so those were things that he really got his students thinking about. And he did that for me too, so he was mostly the bedtime story reader for me, and most of the stories were stories of Jewish episodes of various kinds. I guess I'll also mention that this is almost all about my father, but my mother's sisters all joined the army and fought in the War of 48. She had 4 sisters. Well, she was, up in No, she was in Boston.
Yeah, but it wasn't. She wasn't the one who wanted to. She didn't want to leave.
Right, which they didn't go to high school. These 4 sisters, but my aunt Judith was an officer in the army, and
excellent.
My grandfather did it. My maternal grandfather has a museum in Tzfat about his.
And his name?
Rabbi Aleph Zion Heller, Avraham Zadel Heller.
Rabbi Avraham Aleph Zion Heller.
Right. Heller. And he's known for having, he was a religious authority in Tzfat, and he was known for, he made a psak din that religious Jews could build trenches to prevent.
On Shabbat.
Yes, and even on Yom Kippur.
Even on Yom Kippur.
Right, to prevent this stuff, and he was involved in that. You know, so many people say he has a book about it called Krav al Tzfat, in which he did that. So I know that's a different side of the family, but
it's good to mention.
Okay.
Uri, I think I'm gonna take some pictures now of the pictures.
Okay.
And I want to thank you, man. I really want to thank you for talking to us about your father. It's good that we have his name in our archive, and I think it's important that we have this. Definitely.
Oh, I wish I knew more. I'm sorry that I don't.
It's okay.
It's what I know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So